First of all, it's really good to see work on with local authorities on this really important issue. I think it's less than 2 weeks since I did an LGA conference on modern slavery in its totality, but we did talk about procurement and supply chain. So really welcome the interest from local authorities. As Jaya said, my role is set out in statute, and it's to encourage good practice around investigating modern slavery, identifying victims, but importantly for today, in terms of preventing modern slavery offences. And so that's why I'm really interested in issues of supply chains, because, you know, modern slavery and human trafficking are really failures of our market. If you think about it, in the last 6-12 months, there's been a huge concern in the media and in politics about what's happening to the Uyghur people in Xinjiang and the state-sponsored forced labour there. That's the most egregious example. But in fact, forced labour is in supply chains right across the globe. It's happening in the UK. There have been prosecutions for cases in both factories and farms, and it's highly prevalent in international supply chains. Offenders exploit victims in the production of goods and services, and we all buy those goods and services, whether knowingly or unknowingly. And so local authorities buy those goods and services, either knowingly or unknowingly. And at a personal level, whether it's when we buy cheap personal services, such as a car wash or a manicure, whether it's about the purchase of illegal drugs, or whether it's about purchasing products which have these very lengthy global supply chains with that tremendous downward pressure on price, which results in vulnerable workers across the world being exploited. I often say that, you know, we're much closer to the exploitation of others than we realise. And if we realised, we would be very uncomfortable. So whether it's kind of common foodstuffs such as seafood, coffee, chocolate, whether it's the minerals in our electronics, in our batteries, in our phones, in our computers, whether it's the cotton in our clothes, forced labour risks are a real threat and a real material risk to all business. And as I said, you know, very often the people that are exploited across the world are often vulnerable migrants or vulnerable children. So what can we do about this? And this is where you all come in. The government passed legislation in 2015, the Modern Slavery Act, and Section 54 was a requirement for transparency in supply chains. When this was introduced, it was world leading. It's now 6 years on, and so there's a lot of pressure to improve and to build on that. The matter was really keenly debated through Parliament. And at that point, the public sector was excluded, and the focus was just on businesses with a turnover of £36 million a year or more. But I would argue it's absolutely essential that the public sector plays its part. I think it amounts to something like £290 billion of spend in this country. So a significant ability to show leadership and to do the right thing. And if you think about the sorts of goods and services local authorities are buying, some of them are from high-risk sectors in the UK. So whether it's construction or cleaning or hospitality or agriculture, you're buying goods that come from these sectors which we know can be high risk. And of course, the pandemic has put pressure on all of us. It's put pressure on supply chains, whether that's because in Bangladesh, orders were cancelled overnight. So many thousands of vulnerable young women who work in those factories had no source of income at all, or whether it's a sudden rush to purchase PPE. And again, that puts huge pressure on business and frequently results in exploitation. And you might have read about issues about rubber glove production in Malaysia, real problems with worker migrant exploitation in that business. So it was always a problem. But like so many things, the pandemic has exacerbated the problem and kind of raised our awareness, I would hope. So as I said, to begin with, the legislation was very much about the private sector. But last September, the government announced that it was going to expand the legislation to the public sector. They also have since subsequently announced that they are going to create a single enforcement body, which will pull together the Gang Master and Labour Abuse Authority, the part of HMRC that deals with minimum wages, and also the part of the business department, which deals with the standards and employment agencies, into one body, and that body will have a responsibility for scrutinising the modern slavery statements. But those of you who follow this will know that it's not in this session of Parliament. And while as recently as last week, I was assured by officials that it still is very much the intention, it's becoming clear that there are very practical barriers to the amalgamation, and it will cost money. So we wait and see when this legislation, but I would always argue, isn't it better to do the right thing voluntarily before you're forced to do it by legislation? So it's great to see, in terms of the council's response so far, that a third of all councils, I think, have written modern slavery statements. And that's really great. And I would encourage you to get involved. And if your council hasn't done that yet, to really think about how you might do it. And I would argue this is not just a few days' work for a middle manager, give them the job and get them to copy a few from the internet. This requires real commitment from the top, both in terms of political leadership and leadership from officials. It requires some resources and it requires a degree of expertise. So it's not just for the procurement team. It's got to be something that the whole council is thinking about and understood across the organisation. Because if you don't do that, firstly, it just becomes a meaningless document. You just tick the box. But also, I think it really misses a great opportunity just to raise awareness of the sorts of exploitation which happens, as I say, not just in the rest of the world, but also happens here in the United Kingdom. So if this feels like a really daunting task, please don't be daunted by it. There are some initiatives that might help. That the Home Office Modern Slavery Unit have brought together a group of public procurement experts, and they are working on various projects, and they're going to produce some best practice materials. So look out for those. We've just in the last week been sent a 5-module e-learning program, which has been developed with an organisation called Impact. I'm sure we can send you the link. Emma, who's on this call, can put it in the chat. But it's about just raising awareness and raising some ideas about what needs to be done, and it's suitable for councillors and for officials. When you start to do this, you will also realise, while it might be reasonably straightforward to go to your first tier suppliers, what you'll soon find, of course, is that these supply chains are multi-tiered, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5, and it's very difficult to think about, what you can know about those supply chains. And so one of the things that we are very keen on is what can be done to build awareness amongst workers of their rights. And there are a variety of free apps. There's the Just Good Work app, there's the Modern Slavery Helpline. There are different ways just to think about, down the supply chains, how do you cascade good ideas, best practice? And one of the things to think about is about worker empowerment and kind of better knowledge of their rights. So I hope I'm kind of encouraging you to do this because it's the right thing. At some point, the government will legislate, so you're going to have to do it. But I also think that consumers are getting more interested in this area, the whole area, I think, of human rights and social responsibility in business. Think about the way in which consumer pressure on environmental standards has really shifted activity. And I think we're beginning to see that more under social standards, of which modern slavery and human trafficking are a part. So if the consumers are getting more interested, your voters might be getting more interested and beginning to ask questions of their local councillors and their local councils. So I think that there might be, people power and kind of pressure from people to do the right thing, because you, at the end of the day, are spending their money. And in the same way that investment companies ask businesses, how are you spending our money? Then in the same way, I think voters will be asking councils, how are you spending our money? Are you doing it ethically? And another thought is, this is a great group you got together. I was with the LGA group last week. How can you come together to share best practice? I strongly suspect there is some sort of body that looks after and brings together all the procurement folk in councils. Are they the best points of contact to share best practice, and are there imaginative, tech-driven ways to do this. Don't forget as well that you can learn from business. Business has been doing this for about 4 or 5 years. If you look on the Modern Slavery Registry, which was launched 3 or 4 months ago by the Home Office, you can see lots of examples of businesses and their modern slavery statements. Some are better than others, and if you just spend half an hour on the registry, you would understand what I mean by that. So I think it just leaves me to say, thank you very much for the commitment you've shown by joining today. This is a really important thing to do, but people like Jaya and her team, the work that they've been doing with Tristram Riley-Smith, our office, there are lots of people who will be urging you on and are here to help. So good luck. I think we can together make a really important difference to the most vulnerable workers across the globe.